It's Sunday, March 24th, 2019. That means it's time for the Knee Jerks, Detroit Sports Talk of Eno and Big Al. And for those listening, it's also a Mueller Report-free zone tonight. So that is pretty much that broke this afternoon in the middle of the NCAA Tournament, which is what I've been doing with my weekend. But we'll get to all the tournament news and what's going on in Detroit sports. But first off, let me get the introductions out of the way. And it's a big one. That would be Greg Eno of numerous places on the web. He's my co-host, my partner. You know all the nicknames. He'll tell you where you can find his writing at. Greg, what's up? It's been a couple weeks. Got a lot to talk about.
We do. Thanks, Beaton. I am Greg Eno from my Out of Bounds WordPress blog. You can read me there. Also read me in my Red Wings and NHL blog, which is also on WordPress, called The Winged Wheeler. That's where you can check out my stuff. Nothing new to write this weekend. I didn't get around to pumping anything out. But that's where you can find my bleedings. You can also follow me on Twitter at Greg Eno. Follow the Knee Jerks on Twitter at the Knee Jerks, and on Facebook we are facebook.com/the Knee Jerks. We've got at least NCAA Tournament and Lions to talk about. We might be able to squeeze in some Tigers. We're running a little behind tonight due to my schedule and this podcast, so we're not sure what we'll be able to cover, but we will at least get to those topics. But before we get to any of that, we're going to play a game that we like to call Whose Birthday Is It, Maestro? Everybody pretty much knows how we play this game by now. I'll give Al a clue or two or three of an individual whose birthday it is today in the world of sports. And if Al can correctly guess that person within the first two clues, he'll receive a lifetime subscription to the magazine Cream.
I know. I used to buy that religiously as a teenager. You know, Boy Howdy was always the scene. It was kind of like their catchphrase in that magazine. So if you want to know everything about rock music in the 70s, that was your go-to magazine, and very irreverent at that.
I think it was based out of the Detroit area.
It was local,
and it was spelled Creem. I remember
exactly,
that.
Yes.
Anyways, if you can, that subscription to Cream is up for grabs. If you can correctly guess this personnel. He made his name in the world of baseball, I will tell you that. He was born on this date in 1956, so he's 63 years old today. He was a pretty good player, really. He wasn't a Hall of Famer, but he was a pretty darn good player who will forever be linked with, who ironically will forever be linked with a Hall of Famer. He is not a Hall of Famer.
Mm-hmm.
He will be linked to a Hall of Famer forever. Because of the situation, which was not of his doing, but they're forever joined at the hip. And he played his entire career in the National League. I'll leave it at that.
Wow, that's kind of so he was played in. So he was born in '56, but he played probably the '70s and '80s, probably late '70s and through the '80s. Joined at the hip with a Hall of Famer, and played in the National League. Good Lord. This must be something I should get, because this is kind of you're on the edges of this guy. It sounds like, more than wanting to give me anything concrete. I'm just going to pass, because it's just so many people we could be talking about here. So I'm just going to pass. We'll get to it after we talk about the NCAA tournament. It's not like a plan.
Okay.
All right. Obviously, this past week, actually the last couple weeks, have been dominated by college basketball. Week before, obviously, was all the conference tournaments. And obviously this week, Thursday, the NCAA tournament started. And lots of interest here locally due to Michigan and Michigan State both being in the tournament. Both as 2 seeds. I believe Michigan State was considered the top number 2 seed, and Michigan was considered the last number 2 seed. Essentially, State was 5th, Michigan was 8th overall, like however you want to put it. Regardless of all that, both moved on to the Sweet 16 as expected. Michigan easily knocked off number 15 seed Montana and 10 seed Florida by double digits. And actually, the games weren't even as close as those 19, 20-point victories showed. Michigan State, on the other hand, struggled to beat number 15 Bradley. They pulled away at the end. I think ended up winning by 9 or 10. And they absolutely pounded number 10 seed Minnesota in a bizarre pairing, Greg, of conference teams in the round of 32, which very rarely happens. I guess the excuse to use is that there were too many Big Ten teams, and they had only faced Minnesota once during the year. so they allowed it to happen. Regardless of that, Michigan State continued their role and just pounded them into submission. MSU is going to face number 3 LSU, which really I think is going to be a very tough game for them. Even though LSU, Greg, will probably ultimately these games will be wiped from the books as their head coach Will Wade is currently under suspension for the FBI wiretapping scandal, where he was caught on tape offering players money. But regardless of that, LSU is still in the tournament. Meanwhile, at U of M, actually, if the game's not over as we were recording, it will be soon. Texas Tech is going to beat Buffalo, so Michigan will place Texas Tech, which will be a battle of defensive teams, so Bobby, a low-scoring game. But other than that, the tournament for the most part has been chalk, Greg. There's been some close calls and some minor upsets. Obviously, the big one today was Duke somehow managing to get by UCF and their big 7'6" center. But have you been able to watch much of the tournament, Greg, or any thoughts on what's going on right now?
A little bit. I saw Iowa make that incredible comeback.
Mm-hmm.
That was something else.
Yeah, today against Tennessee.
Tennessee. They didn't win the game, but they were. I think they were down 25.
25, and they took it to overtime.
Yeah, that was something else. That was a 10-2 matchup. But this is par for the course. I mean, the first weekend is always chock full of near misses, upsets. Mentioned Duke. Williamson had to come to the rescue, and there was just a lot of you had some blowouts in there. Some blowouts that you didn't think would be blowouts. You had. I thought Buffalo would do better against Texas Tech, for example. But I mean, it just was. This is just a typical opening weekend of the tournament. It's always got a little bit of everything for everyone, and we're. I don't know that a lot of brackets were busted this weekend. Al, that didn't necessarily happen. I don't think there were a lot of folks that had their brackets busted, but there was enough action, enough almost upsets to keep this. Keep things interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty. Yeah, it's especially like yesterday, Saturday. We're actually recording this on Sunday night. There's actually games going on as we are recording, but for the most part, it was chalk. The expected teams moved on fairly easily. Obviously, there's a couple of teams that are. Well, Liberty, for one, they're actually playing Virginia Tech right now. They're a 12 seed. Actually, that was, I think, the only real upsets of the first 2 days was that 3 12 seeds made it through. Obviously, Liberty made it through. I have trouble keeping track of all these teams, and I watched a lot of these damn games, but it was like you said, typical NCAA tournament. Other than there weren't a lot of buzzer beaters, just one overtime game so far, and the expected teams, the teams that are expected to get to these anywhere from the Sweet 16 to the Final Four, are all still in play. All the Michigans, the Michigan States, the Dukes, the North Carolinas, Virginia. Virginia. That was interesting for a bit with I believe was on Friday, where they were behind a 16 seed at halftime again, but this time they turned things around and won. But for the most part, the 1s and 2s are all alive, and out of that group, those 1s and 2 seeds, that's where we're going to see the national champion come from. It's, almost always happens, at least recently. But did you? I guess locally, Greg, the big news, or I should say, the big controversy with the tournament. Is Tom Izzo, as always. And not for getting knocked out in the first weekend like he has for the last 3 years. He made it out of the first weekend. He's in the Sweet 16. But it was interesting to see this go. I saw this go down live. This was, it happened Thursday afternoon during a Bradley game. And actually, this happened while Michigan State was in the midst of a 10-0 run, starting to pull away from Bradley. And Izzo went off on freshman Aaron Henry during a timeout. They're going into commercial. You see the usual, and the camera's on the Michigan State going to a huddle. And Tom Izzo is he's literally bulges, veins bulging, eyes bugged out, screaming at the kid with his fists literally clenched, looking like he's ready to throw hands, and he's yelling at the top of his lungs, screaming at his player, and actually was being restrained by team captain Cassius Winston, while Henry was yelling back at Izzo. It was not a good look, to say the very least. Izzo and his team, the players like Henry, for example, they all shrugged it off, saying it was just in the heat of the moment, argument, we're family, we love each other. But you got to admit, Greg, it made for awful optics for a school that has had nothing but awful optics for the past year when you look back at all the scandals they've been going through, particularly the Larry Nassar thing. So this incident brought out all the hot takes, and you knew how it was going to split. You had that's how old school coaching is, and that's how I was coached. My coaches yelled at me, and I turned out okay. And then you had the other side saying, yeah, that's your millionaire coach bullying unpaid players, which should be a remnant of another era. So where do you fall in this controversy of Tom Izzo making a scene during a timeout?
Well, the thing that we've all seen coaches yell at players out. Whether usually it's in college sports, whether it's football, basketball, whatever. We haven't. This isn't anything that we really haven't seen, except the thing I think that made this a little bit different, other than it hitting close to home for us because it's Michigan State, was the visual of Izzo having to be kind of separated between he and Henry.
By his players stepping between them. Yes.
And then when they were sitting down during the timeout, when it looked like things maybe had kind of dissipated, and he kind of lunged at Henry again during the timeout while everybody was sitting down. And
he grabbed Henry by the wrist as well.
But you're obviously when these kind of situations happen, you're going to get the former players who are going to rush to the coach's defense. You're going to get the Charles Barkleys of the world who will rush to Izzo's defense and call everybody soft for not making a big deal about this and so forth. But I don't. It just when something like this happens, the first thing you think of is Bobby Knight, whether that's fair or not. And Bobby Knight, of course, had some very questionable run-ins with players and students, and which got him into trouble. Now you can say that Tom Izzo has not had he's been as far as we know, has run. Forget the Larry Nassar thing. Has run a very clean, as far as we know, program. In Michigan State, there hasn't been a lot of naysayers about it. As far as the basketball program itself goes, his players speak very glowingly of him. Of course, they're going to, just like Packers players spoke glowingly of Vince Lombardi and Steelers players who didn't necessarily like Chuck Noll spoke very glowingly about him as a coach. And there's always that fine line between do you like a guy, do you respect him, do you fear him, whatever the case may be. I just, it was a moment in time that was clearly caught on camera. Henry, for his part, was part of the folks that said it was no big deal, nothing to see here. But again, what is the kid going to say?
Bingo.
Tom Izzo is Michigan State. There's no question about that. You stop 15,
most powerful man on campus.
Street, you stop 20, 100 people on the street and ask them if they could name the basketball coach of Michigan State or the president of the university. 97% of them at least would be able to say, I can tell you who the name of the basketball coach is. I can't tell you who the president is.
Right.
So he is Michigan State. There's no question about that. So I don't know that just because we have a lot of former players and Henry himself saying nothing to see here, if that necessarily means nothing to see here. Now, having said that, what am I saying? Well, what I'm saying is that you have to demonstrate some sort of I think control, and I think I don't think it was so much that Tom Izzo yelled, is that he really looked like he was out of control. It looked like he had lost control of himself, and you have to remember these are kids. These are 18, 19, 20-year-old kids, and Tom Izzo's a grown man. He's in his 60s, I think, by now, and it looked it looked like a bullying kind of a thing. But
Yes.
on the other hand, I guess if you know, he had a lot of former Michigan State players rush to his defense, which, you know, I guess that's got to account for something, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
They've all been yelled at by Izzo. You know what you're signing up for when you agree to play for Tom. That could happen. It's kind of like again the Bobby Knight thing. But on the other hand, it just that's what everybody was talking about, and I don't think the University of Al too. I mean, is still stinging from this Larry Nassar thing. I mean, that's still a huge,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the John Engler thing. And I mean, the whole university's just been through the ringer with this
Right.
already. And for them not to be associated during this time of the year where this is supposed to be kind of almost something to make you not think about the Larry Nassar scandal. And here now comes this moment in time that everybody's talking about, and it just, because it's Michigan State, you can't help but think about the Nassar thing. You can't help but think about all the turmoil that's been going on at that university over the past couple of years, and so it's just yet another thing for them to kind of have to fend off. I was a little bit surprised. I thought that Tom might be a little bit more contrite. I thought he might have kind of said, you know, that was my bad. I kind of lost control. I thought he would give a little bit of a mea culpa. I really did, and I was a little bit surprised that he kind of doubled down on it.
Yep.
He you know, clearly didn't. Not only did he not apologize, but he kind of he played the card of you're making a big deal out of nothing card, and you know, it's amazing how this got blown out of proportion. But the thing that I didn't like, Al, he made the analogy. He said, you know, to the press people, he said, you know, if you guys don't do your job, and you're not held accountable by your bosses, well, that's not the same thing. We're talking about, in that scenario, you're talking about grown men who are involved in a situation. This is a coach and a kid, okay, who's not an employee. He's not an employee. This kid's not an employee of you know, he wants to talk about holding people accountable. Aaron Henry's not an employee. He's a student. He's a kid playing basketball. Tom Izzo makes $1 zillion a year. He is Michigan State. This kid is, you know, he's nothing really. And so for him to try to make this apples to apples comparison to his dealing with Henry is the same as an editor at a newspaper dealing with his writers is that's totally off base. I don't know how he can draw that analogy. That's nowhere near the same thing.
Yeah, it's exactly, because that analogy was awful. Because, you know, in a former lifetime, I was a boss. I ran businesses, and how you should always treat your employees, and essentially, if that's the analogy he's going for, is you praise in public, you discipline in private. That's how it's always done. That's how it should be done. At least that's how, you know, good managers and bosses do it. So that analogy, you're right, was, you know, it was apples to rocks. It made no sense at all, you know. But Izzo has said a lot of dumb things off the cuff as of late. Remember some of the crap he spewed during the Larry Nassar investigation last year at this time. But, you know, thinking back on my playing days, obviously I played in the era a lot of these guys, these now aging white sports writers reference to, which is essentially the 70s and then the 80s. I played in the 70s, obviously. You know, my football days, I had coaches hit me in the helmet. I had coaches grab me by the face mask and shake me. Obviously I was yelled at, screamed at, berated, because that was the style of coaching back then. Same with, obviously in basketball, I never got hit, but I sure as hell got screamed at and got literally scared to death. You know, here's a 16, 17-year-old me being screamed at by, you know, middle-aged men who, with, like you said, with spit flying, veins bulging, that kind of crap. It scares the living shit out of you. And it didn't happen to me in front of a national televised audience and 25,000 people in the stands. So, you know, as a former, you know, ex-jock decades ago, it bothers the hell out of me to see coaches do that. You know, because I come from an era where water was given you didn't get to drink water. You were given water if you did what you were supposed to do. You know, crap like that. And this is what a lot of these sports writers are saying were the good old days of coaches, where they could do stuff like that, which is utter bullshit if you ask me. So, yeah, Izzo's a great coach. He's won a lot. I have a feeling in some ways the game is starting to move past him, and I think we're seeing a lot like this is right now when we see incidents like this, especially when you contrast how Izzo acts on the sidelines and with his players in contrast to John Beeline at Michigan, who I think the worst you'll ever see him out of him is maybe he'll throw his hands in the air. He is cool, calm, composed. Don't see, you might see him yell, from when guys are on the court and trying to get something across, but you never ever see John Beeline lose his cool, and that's what I think we're starting to see a little more of a guy like Tom Izzo and other coaches of his ilk, and I think that's to Beeline's credit. Beeline has changed with the times. He is loosened the reins. He still has his ways he wants his team run and how he runs his team, but it really looks like his players enjoy playing the game a hell of a lot more than Tom Izzo's players do. Cause I get the impression sometimes that Izzo's players play in fear. At least that's the impression I get.
There's all sorts of different philosophies, Al, in coaching. You mentioned Beeline. Everybody's got their own style. I mean, I don't know that necessarily one's better than the other. And some work for some people, some don't work for other people. And I remember Bum Phillips said, I don't think you have to yell at a guy to get his attention. And you mentioned fear. Don Shula used to say that he would want players to get mad at him so that they would take it out on the opponents. Everybody's got their own.
I'll just say this. What scared me the most? Being put on the bench. You want to get me to play better? Bench me.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a million different ways to do this, a million different ways to motivate people. I can't remember where I read it the last couple of days. Somebody said that yelling is a cheap way to get to motivate.
I really agree with that. It really
but it's here we go again. We're always. You mentioned that one of the things you just said was Tom Izzo's a great coach. He's won. And I guess that's what all that matters, right? It seems like that's all that matters.
At that level,
you win. If you win, you can do whatever you want. That's what took Bobby Knight so long.
Until you can do something like Bobby Knight or Woody Hayes.
But look what it took for those guys to finally lose their jobs. If it took Woody Hayes to slug an opposing player, on national TV,
it took Bobby Knight to choke a player on tape.
And all that, and also when he put his hands on a student on campus,
right?
Which
that was the final straw. You're right, because the choking kind of put him on double secret probation. It didn't even fire him for that.
So look what it took to get those guys out of it.
Because
and Knight, frankly, and Knight landed on his feet. He went to Texas Tech. It wasn't like I don't think he was out of work for very long.
Nope.
So it's not like Woody Hayes' career ended with that Charlie Bauman incident. But
Woody was like 75 years old.
Knight went on, coach. I don't know how many
10 years, probably another 10 years or so.
Tech, yeah. So Tom Izzo's not going anywhere. Absolutely not. That certainly isn't going to bring him down. So I want to talk a bit more, Al, about Aaron Henry's response, because I think that's kind of getting lost in the shuffle. We're talking a lot about Izzo and his response. I mentioned how
he came off as the adult in the whole damn situation.
Well, yeah, he did. But
at least in how he handled it after the fact.
But I guess to play devil's advocate and take a little bit of a cynical approach to this, and I don't get me wrong, I like the way Henry did indeed handle it, but what is this kid supposed to say? What would he say? He's this freshman who is, was taken to task by the iconic great Tom Izzo, who is Michigan State University, who's powerful, is making some gobs of money, and
actually could revoke his scholarship at any time. Right.
So I don't know that we would expect Henry to have said anything other than what he did, which was, hey, I got yelled at, no big deal. This is what I signed up for, but you can't tell me if you got him behind closed doors and you just kind of said, look, what did you think about that? You can't tell me that he would have been a little bit. I thought that was a little bit over the top. Now we don't know exactly what it is. The speculation was that it was about hustling or lack of hustle or so forth. You mentioned that it looked like Henry was drawing back, and that's difficult to really defined, because when you're in that scenario where it's so loud gymnasium, there's crowd, you have to yell just to be heard.
Right.
So it can look like you're lipping off when you're not really lipping off. So
Yeah.
I don't know. We don't really know what the exact nature of that exchange was, but I just think that the Aaron Henry response is being a little bit I think it's a little disingenuous to say that this kid was is just part of the is saying, hey, it's okay, because I don't know what else we would expect him to say unless he has an incredible amount of balls.
Yeah.
To come
Or
and say,
Zion Williamson.
that was wrong.
Yeah.
I felt embarrassed. I thought the coach embarrassed me out there. He's not going to say that. No, he can think that.
Right.
You can tell his parents maybe, or his best friends. He's not going to say that to the media. If he did anything that was maybe you could tip your hat to, is that he did have the sense not to say maybe what he really wanted to say. But I think we can make a little bit too much about his taking the high road, because I don't know what else he was really expected to say.
Yeah, and this could lead us down a whole rabbit hole of coaches having far too much power, making far too much money for pretty much for what they're doing, let alone they're making this huge amount of money. Izzo was a millionaire, multi-millionaire several times over. So are most head coaches at that level, and they're making that money on the backs of, well, to be honest, unpaid labor, unless you consider a college scholarship money, but they can't eat that college scholarship. So I have a feeling this is going to come to a head over the next few years as to the so-called student athletes at big-time colleges, when that's the last thing. They are athletes first, foremost, and always. And student just kind of gets thrown in there just to keep that veneer of amateurism that they can throw out there by the NCAA. So and that kind of comes up every time another incident like this comes up with if a coach going after a player, or someone like Hugh Freeze gets fired because he was looking for hookers and blow on a burner cell phone, or Rick Pitino doing the same thing for players. That's how he recruited. And there still haven't heard all the fallout of the shoe contract stuff with the thing that, for example, the LSU's coaches that we're currently caught up in with the bribery, wire fraud stuff that the feds are going after these college coaches for. So I have a feeling, Greg, there's going to be some changes sometime in our lifetime that it's going to come to the point where college is going to have to decide one thing or the other. Do we like the kind of money that we're bringing in with big-time college sports, and should we just revel in it, pay the players, and deal with it from there, or they say we are educational and research institutions first and foremost, and we walk away from this whole damn thing? Because remember what Jim Delaney once said. I believe he just recently announced he's going to retire as Big Ten commissioner. He once said that if we have to pay players, we in the Big Ten should just go to Division III, and get rid of. Well, maybe then that's what you should do, because right now, big time college sports, but especially with this $1 billion tournament going on, and obviously the football bowls and things like that, they're glorified. They're not even glorified. They are professional minor leagues. And the only reason the NBA and NFL don't have a true minor league system like the NHL and MLB is because the colleges do it for them, and they don't have to spend the money. And when it comes, first and foremost, they do not like to spend money if they don't have to. So this is what always ends up coming up when guys like Izzo make a scene and then decide to play the leader of men bullshit argument. Know what they are? They are coaches of a multi-million-dollar organization. They essentially run that. That's what they are. Leader of men, what they are is what remember what Chuck Daly's famous line is? I'm in charge of 12 corporations. That's essentially what guys like Tom Izzo are. They are leaders of the men. They are managers.
And I think, Al, what you also saw with Tom's little outburst there is that if you wanted to any more proof of why he would not he's probably not suited for the NBA.
Yes.
That was it right there, because
Yeah, exactly.
that would not fly in the NBA, as
Which,
you know.
and looking at that, it makes even more sense why John Beeline was interested in
Yeah.
going to the NBA.
Right.
He would be a far better fit.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
all right. With that, Greg, let's get question 2 of the birthday game so we can get to our next topic.
Sure. This is the subscription to Cream magazine is squarely in
Yeah,
the
so I
line
can
with
read
this
some
one.
Robert Christgau. Okay, come on.
Okay, 1956, 63 years old, National League, joined at the hip forever with a Hall of Famer because of a trade that occurred.
Ah,
And he was an infielder, a pretty darn good one, but unfortunately not as good as the person he was traded for.
infielder. He was traded for ended up being traded for a Hall of Famer in the this trade was a National League trade.
Yes, yes.
Within a National League. Huh. God damn.
He was traded straight up for this Hall of Famer. 1981 was between the 81-82 season.
81-82 season. A straight up trade, a Hall of Fame, a good player for ultimately a Hall of Fame player. Huh. Shoot. I'm at a loss. I really am.
Okay.
You've been stumping me lately, and I don't like it. I don't like this. Oh, well, I guess I'll just have to go to eBay and see if I can buy some old magazines on eBay or something for Cream. All right, hopefully I'll get the gimme at number 3. But with that,
Okay.
let's keep this show moving, so to speak. And let's talk Lions specifically. NFL free agency was over the last week and a half, 2 weeks or so. Actually, free agency hit the negotiating period hit right after our last podcast, as a matter of fact. And during that time, Bob Quinn was, in the words of the magician on Frosty the Snowman cartoon, busy during the early days of free agency. They made a big-time splash, Greg. Early in free agency, their big move was obviously spending big-time money in inking the top defensive end in free agency, Trey Flowers, obviously from, of course, the Patriots. He got a 5-year, $90 million deal. Also, at that point, they also signed Justin Coleman, I believe, from Seattle. They made him the highest-paid slot cornerback in the NFL. 4 years, $36 million, and there's talk that they actually may end up playing him on the outside. Again, he has Patriot ties as well, being he played for Patricia before he went to Seattle for a couple years. They also signed another veteran Patriot, and that would be Danny Amendola. He is out-and-out slot receiver, but he's also, I think, he'll be 34 when the season starts. But they gave him just a placeholder deal, 1 year, $4.2 million. Essentially, he is your Golden Tate replacement. And the other, I think, big money deal they gave was at tight end. That would be Jesse James, best known for the call in the AFC Championship game a couple years ago where he crossed the goal line, his ball hit the ground, and it was called incomplete, which is now, that rule has now been changed. He was a tight end with Pittsburgh. He was given a 4-year, $22.6 million deal. And obviously there were some other guys signed. Tommy Lee Lewis is the wideout, best known for that being interfered with in the NFC Championship game and the flag not being thrown. Given a 1-year deal. The team also signed Rashawn Melvin as a cornerback, 1-year deal. They tried to get running back Malcolm Brown to back up Kerryon Johnson, but he was a restricted free agent, and the Rams matched the Lions' $3.25 million offer. Obviously, I think the biggest thing with these signings, Greg, is one, they went heavy defense. They went heavy. They went for the biggest name at tight end because we saw what train wreck tight end was. And the other thing is all of these deals are heavily, the multi-year deals, I should say, are heavy backloaded, where the big money is in the last couple years of the deal. The Lions are either thinking that they'll be able to handle dead money if they want to move on from these guys at that point, or the fact that the salary cap they are anticipating going up significantly. So I think that's the scary part with these deals. I mean, there's no question Flowers, specifically Flowers and Coleman, are very good players at their position. I mean, Flowers is probably considered one of the top 5 free agents out there. But we saw what happened with this team a few years ago when they kept kicking the can on the salary cap when the Nagamic and Sue was around, and ultimately they couldn't keep him just because they had so much dead money they had to deal with. I think that's the fear with this, Greg, is that yes, they got some solid players here that look like they can fill some holes. The scary part is the pressure on Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia to win now? So they're saying, well, let's not worry about the future right now because we won't be here in 4 years if we don't win in the next year or two.
Well, 2 weeks ago, because all these signings happened right after we did our last show.
Right.
2 weeks ago, we were talking about the Lions clearing out all this cap space, cutting all these players, and creating all these holes.
They were going to make a splash.
You asked if this was a portend to a rebuild, and I said, well, maybe it's a portend of a big free agency spending spree, and
you called it.
It's exactly what it ended up being. Now, having said that, it's exciting for the fans. I mean, you see some big name people come in. It's exciting to see them spend money and exciting to see them address defense and so forth. But as we all know, that has never really proven to be the way to build a championship football team. You can use free agency to patch some holes, maybe to add some complementary pieces. Maybe you can occasionally, sign a really big name guy, and he can have such an impact that it can change the fortune of the team. But for the most part, free agency is used as a complementary piece and to the draft and so forth, and to player development of players already in your roster. So that's what should give Lions fans pause, is that it's nice to see all these purse strings being loosened and Trey Flowers being the big fish, but this is usually not the way you go about. But on the other hand, it's one of those damned if you do, damned if you don't things. Right. If the Lions didn't do anything, if they were quiet in free agency, and then they would have been taken to task for that. So, like
they were last year, they just made the middling moves last year, and people called them out for that.
At least but if they were going to spend money, at least it looks like they've put their money in places where it was wise to put their money in,
and also guys that still are relatively young.
Yes, for the most part.
They're like 25 to 27.
For the most, obviously, except for Amendola, but that's
that one's obviously we're just going to punt on the slot receiver or maybe get gun up in the draft.
Okay, but for the most part, you're right. A lot of these guys are in their prime. It looks like on paper that they may have upgraded the cornerback position. It looks like on paper they may have upgraded safety. It looks like on paper that they upgraded a tight end, and it certainly looks like on paper that they upgraded on their defensive line with the pass rush. Flowers has been nothing but healthy. He doesn't come to Detroit with any sort of injury history, which you can't say for Ziggy Ansah, for example. And so it makes for at least gives fans something to look forward to heading into the draft. Flowers was the big one. I think if they had only gotten Flowers and didn't get anybody else, the fans would have been happy with that. But as it was, they went ahead and got some other pieces and made a big splash right away. And I thought maybe made some wise under the radar signings. They got another guard. They got a back from the Raiders, and the Buccaneers, and a couple of playmakers supposedly in the backfield, defensive backfield. So we'll see. But the Lions have also unfortunately had this Midas touch about them that it seems like whenever they get their hands on players like this, they just don't ever seem to really pan out.
Right. Yeah, and it is worrisome that I would that one is the Patriot connection is always thrown out there, and we all saw the bad jokes thrown out during the at least the early part of free agency. They're calling them the Detroit Patriots, the New England Lions, whatever you want to call it, but. it is odd that Amendola, Flowers, Melvin, and Coleman all have Patriot ties or ties of Patricia with the Patriots. So that's, I don't know if I'm concerned about that or not, but the thing is, when has that ever worked where teams sign guys off the Patriots and become Super Bowl winning teams? It doesn't really happen, but, there's always a first time. And again, like I said, Flowers and Coleman specifically, and Jesse James, who doesn't have Patriot ties, are all relatively young players. They're in their prime or just coming into their prime. So it's not like they're signing a bunch of guys on the bad side of 30. So they got that going for them. But I will say this, please, and you pretty much alluded to this, Greg. When you say, free agency does not fix all. You cannot build your team via free agency. And seeing Lions fans getting all giddy over free agency, I mean, how many times have we been through this, and how many times do they need to get burned by things not panning out or something happening to where I've been burned so many times by this franchise that I don't get all excited over signings like this. I thought, yeah, those seem like good moves, but let's let this all play out. And that's the one problem I have with fans. I hate telling people how to fan, but, I mean, it's awesome. I mean, how many times have we seen the Lions win a press conference or the Lions win a award to sign a free agent and then it leading to a 7-9 season? Too many times. So I'm not, were these on paper good moves? It looks that way. But I am not going to get all fired up about this, about how this is all going to pan out until we see how it looks in September. Again, we still also have the draft to come about, and for all we know, the Lions could be targeting a tight end or a guard in the draft, and we know how well that's going to go over at the fan base. And that's the other thing with these signings, Greg, is that, and I think I kind of mentioned this on our last podcast, was depending on how free agency goes, that could give the Lions all kinds of options on draft day. And now after, getting a starting cornerback and a starting defensive end, all of a sudden, I think that opens up the draft more for them to take possibly a guard to replace T.J. Lang or to take one of those top tight ends out of Iowa. Because, even though they signed James is not a game-breaking tight end. He is a blocking first, then receiving tight end. He is not a 3-down tight end. So I want to wait and see how this all goes down, because I've been burned so many times by this team, Greg. I refuse to get excited. I just cannot do it, and I still can't believe fans are out there that do.
Well, yes, absolutely. But on the other, it's one of those weird relationships because
yes, we won the draft.
You want to you want to have something to get excited about, and so you end up getting excited about things that in the back of your head that you really shouldn't be. But
yes.
But again, this is
in the back of my head. Yes.
This is though, again, Bob Quinn would have been taken to task if he didn't do anything. He would have been taken to task if he, swung and missed at these guys. So you really can't. It's kind of disingenuous to. I'm not taking the task for this. I'm just saying that. I mean, I applaud his efforts, but I'm just cautious because this isn't usually the way to do it. But on the other hand, these were needs that the team did have. Like you said, it'd be interesting to see how that affects the draft. But and with the exception of Amendola, they didn't give out, I don't think, any bad contracts.
No, there's no contracts. I think that would leave a crap ton of dead money if they wanted to move on in a couple years.
Right.
But
some of them are even one-year deals. Some are even one-year deals.
Yeah, exactly. There's only like 3 that were big multi-year deals, and only the only one that I think that they're pretty much stuck with the guy is Trey Flowers. And then again, he's only 26, and he should be productive for the length of his contract, barring injury. But regardless of all that, it's again, we'll have to wait and see what happens at the draft, because I have a feeling now this opens up tight end and guard or even wide receiver for this team right now. So it's with the Lions, it's always wait and see. But they seem to have improved the team. we'll just see if this all actually pans out on the field. All right, Greg, birthday game, question 3. Give me the gimme.
Well, this player was a shortstop. He was traded for another shortstop who ended up going into the Hall of Fame. The trade was between the San Diego Padres and the St. Louis Cardinals. And like I said, this player was pretty good. But when you're traded for a Hall of Famer, that's just something you can't, you have no control over, and you can never really live up to. So I don't know that I think that should be the gimme.
Padres and Cards.
Shortstop for shortstop.
So that would be. God, I know. Obviously, the shortstop is Ozzie Guillen. Went from
Smith.
San Diego. Yeah,
Smith.
Ozzie Guillen. Yeah. No, it's funny because I don't know why I suddenly even thought about the White Sox former manager in the American League shortstop. But yeah, Ozzie Guillen. It's Terry.
No, Gary.
Jerry. Gary Templeton?
Yeah, very good.
Yes.
Gary Templeton.
Yeah. God, it's funny. I completely forgot Ozzie Smith started his career in San Diego.
Yeah.
Because
Padres fans don't forget that.
No. But no, which is funny considering, especially here, here in the Eastern time zone, it's like the Padres barely exist when you think about it.
Right, I know.
It's even in today where, if I want to listen to a game, we have a Sirius XM subscription, and baseball games come with that. You can listen to every radio call, so I could listen to any baseball game I want, and yet it's still like the Padres are never on television. They're never really nationally televised, and they haven't been relevant in decades. So, and trades like that are part of the reason why, obviously. So. But damn, I wouldn't have forgotten that because I completely forgot Ozzie Smith was a Padre for a while. He started his career there. All right, so no cream subscription to me. I guess I'll have to stick to Hit Parader. So, all right, at our remaining time, let's see if we can get to the Wings and Tigers. Red Wings, Greg, some news there. The big personnel news was the Red Wings decided to keep Jimmy Howard for another year. And this, I think, was really a no-brainer for them. They have what goalies they do have, either in the system or still in juniors, or that they have the rights to, but aren't close to being ready for the NHL. There's nobody ready, and obviously Jonathan Bernier has been less than impressive. His, I think his goals against is 3.27. He's got a 90. His save percentage is only 900. So. It's Jimmy Howard or bust. So it really made sense that they kept Jimmy Howard, Greg, and it was a reasonable deal. 1 year, $4 million. There's $1.1 million in incentives. The incentives involve games played and playoff and playoff wins, which I doubt that's going to happen. But regardless, it's a reasonable deal. It's not, when this talk was going down, earlier in the year. The fear was, oh, God, they'll give Jimmy Howard a 3-year contract. So I think this is awesome. That's obviously one. Jimmy Howard does not want to leave Detroit. And the other obvious thing is Detroit has nobody to replace him. So it really did work out. I'm just surprised Howard gave him a hometown discount, even though I have a feeling playing into that is that he's not getting any younger. I believe he's 35 years old. So, but, this is one of those times, Greg, where I will not get upset at Ken Holland for signing a veteran.
Well, it's I see where you're coming from. I wrote a piece that basically threw a shovel and threw dirt on Jimmy Howard's career in Detroit. I was pretty sure about a couple months ago that he was not coming back.
Traded. Yeah.
Well, that he wasn't coming back. So, either was going to get traded or was going to be simply not re-signed. Right. I was premature in that. But having been wrong about that, I'm not that upset about this either. I mean, what else are they going to do? Where else are they going to go for goaltending? You mentioned Bernier is having an awful year. Frankly, Howard, after a very hot start, has kind of cooled off. Although his defense clearly has a lot to be desired. I understand that
there are worse goalies in the NHL.
Oh, there's no question. There's no question. And he. Hey, as far as the sentiment goes, and for as long as he's been with the organization, as they say in hockey, then
Yes.
that's fine with me. If that's the direction, the Red Wings aren't going to go anywhere anyway in the standings in the near future. He's stopgap. It sounds like it may only be a 1-year extension, by the way.
Right. Yeah.
It's a stopgap measure. It keeps him in Detroit at least a little while longer.
And they can still trade him next year.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, it's not. I'm not going to go crazy over this one. If they were talking about a 4 or 5 year extension, obviously that's the wrong thing to do. But extend him for another year. Maybe wait until you can get somebody else in. They really don't have any really good, hot goalie prospects right now in the minor leagues.
no.
So we'll see about what they do after the Jimmy Howard era. But Jimmy Howard is not what's wrong with this team. I understand
that's
that.
a very good point there.
It's not him. I get it. I just thought the reason I had written what I wrote was that I just thought that his time was over with, and that they were going to go elsewhere, and that he.
And they had Bernier as well. I mean, that was the impression I got with Bernier when they signed him out of free agency last offseason was he was going to be the stopgap.
Well, there was a time when we thought
bad.
they've brought in Mrazek. We thought Mrazek was going to be the goalie of the future.
Right.
A couple Thomas McCollum. We thought
Maybe.
he might be the goalie. Yeah, there's Bean in the background. We thought that he might be in the goalie of the future. He wasn't, as it turns out. So I mean, here Jimmy Howard is the last man standing, and he's still here, and he's 35 years old, and he's going to be the goaltender here for at least another year. And whether that's good news or bad news, I don't think fans are. You can have the Jimmy. I think the fans are of the mindset that says, you can give me Jimmy Howard for another year. Just give me Steve Yzerman in the front office. If that's what's right on.
That kind of leads us to the next topic,
right?
Which is this past week there's rumblings of Jeff Blashill getting a contract extension. Obviously, Ken Holland hinted at this, at keeping Blashill, because he's essentially a lame duck right now. He's in the last year of his 4-year deal. And he hinted at this after the trade deadline passed, how he liked the job Blashill was doing and was hinting at extending him. Well, this past, I'd say the last 10 days or so, Bob McKenzie of NBCSN mentioned during one of their national broadcasts that the Wings and Blashill were close to, as in his words, quote, putting pen to paper to an extension. So if true, Greg, if Blashill's going to ink a deal, and there's no word on if it's going to be a year or two or what, this kind of throws, I wouldn't say a monkey wrench into the Steve Yzerman is going to come back to the Red Wings thing, but I have a feeling if I guess it all depends on how long the extension is when it comes down to it. No, if it's a year or maybe even 2, there is nothing to keep a team from moving on from that kind of deal, because in the big scheme of things, that's not a lot of money. But does it mean that maybe Yzerman isn't coming back? Or could it mean that Ken Holland is going to be GM through hell and high water, and if Yzerman does come back, maybe it's not as an active running the team role, it's more of a Jimmy Devellano, president of the team type of role, or an advisor type role, like what he's doing with Tampa Bay, or what Scotty Bowman was doing in Chicago, that kind of thing, where maybe Yzerman is not going to be involved in day-to-day decisions. He will just be on the payroll as an advisor or a president or something of that ilk. So what do you think happens here?
I don't know. I think the focus right now should not be on Steve Yzerman. I know what people want to go there, but let's talk about why they would extend Blashill. Forget Yzerman. Whether Yzerman's coming or not, I mean, why would they extend Blashill?
That's going to be on Holland. Holland must like what he's seeing.
Right? I have seen. I have. My opinion. I mean, I know that coaches get too much credit when the team wins and too much blame when they lose. I understand that, but to me, a good barometer of whether a coach is getting through to his players is what the effort is when the team isn't going anywhere, when the playoffs are no longer a reality, when you're mathematically eliminated. What kind of effort are you putting forth? To me, that is a barometer of how well a coach is getting through to his players. And since the Red Wings have been essentially, mathematically always comes last, but before being mathematically eliminated, when they were just plain eliminated by the smell test, they've played some real stinkers. I mean, some real bad games where they've been blown out. The effort hasn't been there. They had that monstrosity against the Canadians a few weeks ago in Detroit. They've been spanked left and right.
Well, they're hovering right now, around the second or third worst record in the league right now. They've been in those two spots.
I've seen a lot of crooked scores, 6-1, 8-1, 6-2, and they just haven't been in these games. And I, and a lot of times it's been effort has been what's been pointed at, has been the effort and the lack thereof. And I don't know how that equates to Jeff's getting through to the players and Jeff's doing this and Jeff's doing that. I don't know. I was a little bit taken aback by that news that there might be an extension on the table for him. And I know that the Red Wings are. We just talked about Jimmy Howard about the Red Wings are not going anywhere in the standings, but I don't know that Blashill has earned that right to try to take this team. He's had him for 4 years, the team for 4 years, and I don't see where he's really done enough to say we should give him another 3 to 4 years and take us now through this stage of the rebuild to the next step up. Again, forget Yzerman. To me, this isn't about Yzerman. I know fans want to tie the two together and say, well, geez, the fact that Blashill's being extended means that Stevie's not coming back. I don't think, first of all, I don't think that's necessarily true because, Stevie could come back in a different kind of a role. May not be maybe the role that fans would like to see him in. But I just want to talk, let's just keep it about Blashill. What is it about Blashill? I just see a lot. And a lot of what the comments I'm seeing and what you and I have said is that there doesn't seem to be a lot of accountability for the veterans. All of the
has been. You're right.
All the shade gets thrown at the younger players. I see these miserable efforts in recent weeks after the team's been eliminated. But then they'll come out and they won in Vegas last night. They'll win a game in Vegas, against a team that's going to the playoffs, and so they're kind of all over the map, but that's what I'm talking about. You don't really know, Al, what you're going to get from these guys night to night, and I'm not saying that every game they've played has been a stinker, but you don't know what you're going to get out of the Red Wings on a nightly basis. You really don't. You really don't know if you're going to get 60 strong minutes, or if you're going to get 15 minutes and 45 minutes of bad effort, or if you're going to get a sieve for a defensive sieve, or if you're going to get a tightly checked game. There's no consistency there. They don't have an identity. There's no Red Wings way of how they play, and that comes back. That to me, that's a reflection of the coach. Now it's also a reflection of talent. I get it, but I'm going to have to give Kenny Holland a half apology, because I think he's actually done a pretty good job. As it turns out, I'm warmed up to his rebuilding efforts, and I think he's stockpiled. There's a lot of young players coming through the pike. I think he's done a pretty good job of restraining himself from those old days of acquiring old veterans, for stopgap. I think he's kind of finally gotten that out of his system.
Yeah, he's still got a few of those stopgap veterans for another 3 or 4 years. I know. We haven't seen one of those kind of contracts in a while.
But he has not. I think he's doing okay. But it took him longer than I would have liked for him to finally come around to come to terms with this. But he has. I think he's bought into this whole rebuild thing full bore now. But Blashill, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what you think, but I just don't. I don't see where he's deserving of an extension. I just don't.
Well, what gets me is, I would just say this: if there's an opportunity to upgrade the coach, and it very well could be a guy like Joe Quenneville still out there, why don't you move in that direction? Find a proven winner, because that's the type of coach this organization that's always seemed to lean towards anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, hell, Barry Trotz was available last offseason. That would have been a guy would have snapped up at a damn heartbeat.
Right.
That's, we've seen 4 years of Blashill now, and at times he still looks like he's trying to figure out this coaching at the NHL level thing to me.
Yeah.
And specifically, really, oftentimes it comes down to how he handles players, how he handles, how he essentially refuses to hold veterans accountable for much of anything. While, as you mentioned, the young players seem to be shit on daily. It seems like. Going back, like we had this discussion earlier a few episodes ago with the Dennis Cholowski stuff, where he went out to the West Coast and he was going to see his family was going to see him play in the NHL for the first time, I think in Vancouver, and the asshole benched him. Couldn't he have done it a game earlier or a game later? No, it had to be that game. That's the kind of stuff that I think a better coach doesn't do. He picks his spot to make that disciplinary move, not at a spot where the guy is likely to play over his head because because of the situation. So that's I think more than anything that's gotten me with Blashill is the X's and O's aren't going to bother me that much when it comes to a coach, but when it comes to how he runs the locker room, how he runs the team, how he treats young players compared to aging veterans. I think the Wings could do better. I'm with you there. And so this extension stuff, I won't say it surprises me. I will say it disappoints me.
Yeah, I just don't know what the case is to do this.
I think more than anything, it might be Ken Holland trying to put the blame on himself and say it's not this guy's fault that this team is going to possibly pick second in the draft this year.
Well, I hope hey, if this is true and they do,
I could see a year maybe, just because it would make them both lame ducks again.
Yeah,
but it's one of those things where I don't know. I guess we'll just have to kind of wait and see, if the extension happens and for how long. Because if it's a year, I could understand it happening because even if Yzerman does come and take on the team. He might roll with it for a year just to get the lay of the land. Who knows? But I don't think the guy has earned the extension. I don't know what Holland sees in this. You're right. It just this team is still, despite what I think Holland might be thinking, this team is years away from contending, at least 2 or 3. He might be thinking a year or two. I don't know, but I think if this team is going to go further, it's going to be with someone other than Blashill. And I think that's where you finally have to decide, is this the guy we can get over the hump with? He's shown no signs of being that guy.
No, he really hasn't, Al. And if the Red Wings were playing their butts off every single night for this guy, and they weren't making the same mistakes over and over again, there weren't these constant mea culpas by the players about lack of effort and and all these dour post-game interviews where they're deathly quiet and the players are just they have no answers and they're discussing with themselves and the leaders don't have any answers and but that happens. It just seems like it happens too often. Right. And especially since they've been eliminated from contention for the playoffs, it's happened a lot. And I'm not saying they don't like him. I'm not saying that I just don't think that they don't, you were talking earlier in the show about how different coaches motivate. And I don't know that there's really, guys like Scotty Bowman, guys like Mike Babcock. I know those are transient coaches. Those are guys that probably both. Well, I think Babcock is Hall of Fame too as well. Right. Frankly, but I mean, I just don't see. Those kind of guys didn't. There wasn't ever that. That never happened. There was never. Never did the players say, "Well, we didn't try. We did. I don't know where our we had our heads up our ass," and that never happened with those guys. And I just don't know that there's an accountability. I don't think they fear Blash. I don't think they. I don't think there's enough. I don't know what the.
Well, I think it's obvious the veterans don't fear him at all.
That's and they shouldn't. I don't blame them for not fearing him because they don't. He never benches them. He never has a veteran in street clothes unless they're injured. Nobody ever sits in the press box and watches a game ever. I don't know how many times, some of these guys should be up in the press box watching games, several games in a row. Never happens. And, I'm not getting it. I'm not feeling it, but, hopefully maybe Kenny knows something that we don't know. He sees something we don't see.
Right.
I don't know, but again, if the fans, if they don't get their Steve Eiserman, and they're going to be giving Jimmy Howard, and they're going to be giving Blashill, it's going to be an ornery group of hockey fans if that's what ends up happening.
Right. More than anything else, I think there's going to be hell to pay. This is going to be one ugly, upset fan base if Eiserman doesn't show up and the other two come back. All right. Quick note about the Tigers before we call it a podcast, Greg. We talked about this our last show when it was announced that the Tigers were going to back off on Michael Fulmer because as we mentioned on that show, his velocity, he'd lost more than a foot on his fastball. He'd lost a couple feet off his fastball, and they were going to take a step back, take him off a mound, retweak his mechanics, and build him back up. Well, a couple days after Fulmer said, yeah, things are looking good in the bullpen, I think we're getting things worked out, and he was pitching without a brace, the Tigers announced that Michael Fulmer will need Tommy John surgery, and that'll put him on the shelf to at least mid-season 2020. He probably won't, if he does come back as the pitcher we expect him to be, he probably won't even be that pitcher till the 2021 season at this point, because recovery from Tommy John is usually 14 to 16 months, which would put us like August of the 2020 season. So the team also said, Greg, that Fulmer's elbow pain was not related to the knee issues, which had forced the Tigers to shut him down earlier in spring training. So right now we don't know who's going to take a spot in rotation, as both Daniel Norris and Spencer Turnbull are on the 25-man roster. One will be a starter, one will go to the pen. So this I think, Greg, you could probably say I told you so at this point, because one of the reasons the Tigers were able to get Fulmer to begin with was this fear of his mechanics, that it were so violent that he was going to do something to himself. And that's pretty much all he's done for the last 3 seasons now, is get hurt. And now with Tommy John putting him on a shelf for at least a year and a half, this is one of those things where the Tigers are going to have – I have a feeling the Tigers may have to start just planning life without making Michael Fulmer a part of any future plans right now. Anything to get out of Fulmer in the future is just going to be icing, because you cannot plan baking a cake with Michael Fulmer at this point.
No,
he's just too injury prone. It's a knee, it's a shoulder, it's an elbow. It's always something. Just because of, and I think if you try to fix his mechanics, he's not going to be the same pitcher.
No, he's probably going to go down in history.
This generation's Mark Friedrich or something like
that. Yeah. I mean, kind of. I mean, he was the rookie of the year. He didn't capture the fancy of the fans like Friedrich did, but nobody did, frankly. But
a rookie of the year, guy was expected to be the ace of the staff.
He was a guy that a couple of years ago teams would have tripped over themselves to trade for him at the trade deadline. I was one of those people, full disclosure, that was not on the trade Fulmer train at all.
Yes,
I said, that's silly, it's nuts. Of course, a lot of the people now are shoving that in people like me faces, because they're saying, see, I told you so, so we should have traded him when we had the chance. Okay, that's all right, fine. You've got hindsight. I know you want to crow that you were saying that they should have traded him 2 years ago. What?
Yeah.
Why? Because you knew he was going to have Tommy John surgery in 2 years? No, baloney. If you wanted to trade him 2 years ago, fine, but don't try to make it look like that you wanted to trade him because something like this was going to happen. That's much baloney. You just wanted to trade him because you got all tied up in this trade ticket prospects thing. It wasn't about being afraid that he was going to get hurt. I mean, I don't care what anybody says. But, obviously you got to move on. You got to move on. You move on from him. Probably he's probably not. If he comes back and he contributes as a number 3 guy in a rotation, great.
Or you put him in the bullpen.
Or put him in the bullpen. We don't. Al, who knows? Guys come back from these things all the time. This is not new. This is hardly a new phenomenon. People have Tommy John surgery all the time. Mm-hmm. You can come back. You can be a good pitcher. That's been proven time and again. Mm-hmm. So it's silly to write him off. But clearly, for at least the next year, the Tigers have to move on without him. At least that's been that Fulmer thing has at least kind of been buttressed by the fact that Jordan Zimmerman's having a pretty good spring, and he was named the opening day starter, which is no surprise. And that could be a nice story if he comes back and kind of regains some of his old touch. And but the Fulmer thing, he was a China doll, like you said, and it wasn't like this came out of nowhere. He's always hurt. This is obviously a big one, but you can come back. You can be successful.
It just might be a couple years.
Yeah, sure. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Hopefully he's not the next Mark Fidrich or Joe Zumaya. So hopefully he will. And as you said, Tommy John is not a career-ending injury anymore. So he might come back. But the Tigers will have to figure out something. How they can tweak his mechanics to keep him healthy, because how he pitches now, he's just a walking injury at this point. So we'll see what happens. So, and obviously opening day is Thursday. I bet you can't wait. Especially now they won't have Jacoby Jones in center field. So obviously Jacoby Jones was hurt, I believe, yesterday in the spring training game. Hurt his shoulder. He'll be out a month. So now center field will likely be manned by Mikey Matuk and Nico Goodrum. On the corners, you have Dr. Strangelove, glove 1 and 2. So it's going to be an ugly outfield. But, hey, baseball's back, and that's always a good thing. So I will be watching the games, just probably not not with an eagle eye, but I will be watching the games. And I'm glad baseball's back. I'm just not glad I'm going to be a fan. I'm a fan of a team that's like going to lose 100 games. So, but what are you going to do? This is the situation we find ourselves in, and they aren't listening to us, obviously, Greg. So, all right, with that, let's wrap this show up. Who's your jerk of the week?
Yeah, I got to go with our one of our favorite columnists, Mitch Albom. Mitch did a couple.
Righteous. Yes.
He did a couple of pieces lately that were, to me, cringeworthy. One of them was about after Teddy Lindsay died. He wrote a piece about trumpeting Ted's union efforts, and you got to stand for something. And he made a big deal about that.
Yes, I know where you're going.
A lot of former. A lot of journalists who were around when the strike happened, and Mitch crossed the picket line.
He crossed the picket line
back in the mid-'90s.
It was a huge deal when he did it. Because he was a star columnist.
And here he is now lauding Ted Lindsay for being principled, and that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way.
It sure did.
The second one that he wrote that rubbed people the wrong way, including me, was this analogy he made between the Lori Loughlin and Felicity Huffman college scandal, where they used their influence to essentially buy their kids' way into universities, and he made the analogy between that and college athletics, and that he wrote a column. This was dated March 17th, a week ago today. He made the comparison between what those Hollywood stars did. And he used it as an example of saying, hey, college academics are, of course they're corrupt, and college athletics are corrupt. And he was trying to compare these Hollywood actors getting their kids into school to student athletes getting scholarships over perhaps more worthy.
Well, what they were doing was they were being given. The coaches were taking bribes to put their names on a roster, and then when these kids got into school, they just wouldn't report or wouldn't play or say they were injured.
Right.
So and they weren't getting scholarships of anybody, but they were taking a spot in school over somebody.
So Mitch wrote this column that tried to put the two things as equal, as the same thing, and frankly, to be brutally honest with you, you could almost say it was kind of racist in a way, and it was. that rubbed people the wrong way, including me. I thought he was off base on that. He just seems to be. He comes out of the woodwork, Al, and chimes in on these hot button topics, but he always seems to be on the wrong side, or he does it in a way that's disingenuous, or that runs counter to his own personal beliefs or behaviors or actions, and which makes it disingenuous, of course. And people see right through it. I mean, he got completely called out on that article about the Ted Lindsay thing, and he got called out by some people. My friend Darren Nichols, who used to be a reporter for the Detroit Free Press, and until he had a stroke a few years ago, pointed this out to me, where Mitch, because I missed it initially, where Mitch was making this comparison, and I thought it was just wrong. It was just wrong. Yeah. And I don't know where he's kind of lost his moral compass. I get the feeling that Mitch writes like what he thinks people want to read, but A, it's not what they want to read, and B, it runs counter to his own actions. Yeah, and he's disingenuous, and I just think that these two most recent ones, Lindsay and the one about the college thing, were just really egregious examples of that.
Yeah, Album writing about Ted Lindsay's essentially costing him his career, but with his labor, how he was supported the union, yet Album crossed a picket line.
Right.
That I can't believe he didn't.
Because he could afford to. Because he could afford to.
Yeah, exactly. Because he we could do an entire podcast just ripping on the bullshit Album is pulled. I can't believe he's considered. Well, actually, I don't think he's more become a laughingstock at this point. He's one of those columnists. We see it all the time in journalism. The world has passed this guy by, and as you said, he just jumps into the occasional hot button topic, says something dumb or which could be easily be refuted, or just comes off as clueless, and then we see him. Then he has another column next Sunday talking about heaven or some goddamn thing. The stuff. Yeah, you're right. You nailed it with Mitch Album. You could, I can't believe I used to enjoy his writing, but that was decades ago. He's a completely different guy now. As you said, I think money really did change him. And I will always say this about Mitch Albom. He is the best fiction sports writer I've ever seen, because remember what book he wrote? The Fab Five. And didn't mention a word. Didn't have a thing about it, about what was going on behind the scenes of all the money changing hands of Chris Webber and all that, and the scandal that ultimately, and he was with them all the damn time, and yet there was not a hint of the scandal in that book that was brewing around the Fab Five. So, and let's not forget that he made up an entire scenario at the Final Four one year about a conversation with about players in the stands who weren't in the stands. They weren't even there. So
right.
That's the kind of thing you should lose your job over. But because he's Mitch Albom, he didn't. So you nailed it on him. All right, my jerk of the week, Greg. I'm going to go with with Robert Kraft, the owner of the New England Patriots, because since we last talked, speaking of SBI stings, he was caught up. I guess he was. I supposedly there's video of him out there being caught up in at a massage parlor where you get quote unquote happy endings, and here's this billionaire showing up at this strip mall massage parlor to get himself a hand job, and obviously this week he issued a non-apology apology because he couldn't admit that he was caught, or obviously you're innocent until proven guilty, but reportedly, I'm not going to get on anybody's case over what two consenting adults do, but for a billionaire to be literally caught with his pants down like this makes me wonder what in the hell is going through your mind. You have money, you have options when it comes to doing things like this. Why on earth would you go to a massage parlor? And the reason they got caught up in this is because the massage parlor was being investigated for human trafficking. So it's turned into this really ugly mess. Kraft has had nothing to do with the trafficking, but he was dumb enough just to get himself caught up in a situation like this. And we see this time and time again, Greg, that even though the guys may have a lot of money, doesn't necessarily mean they're smart. And obviously, Robert Kraft did a very dumb thing that he's likely not going to pay for. He's probably ultimately going to skate on a fine. And I'm not worked up about that. It's just the fact that he got himself in the situation to begin with, when stuff like that is easily avoidable. So my jerk of the week is Robert Kraft for not getting a hand job in private, like most everybody else.
Oh, boy. That's a first on the show, I think.
Yeah, talking about happy endings on the show, and I think that's a good time to end the show. So happy ending to everybody. We're going to end the show. All right, Greg, before we hit the road, get out any plugs, thank yous, and what's up?
Okay, yeah, you're going to tell us how we can see, or you can tell the folks how they can find the show if they haven't already by now. But I will say you can read me at Greg Eno Out of Bounds, my WordPress blog. You can also read me at my Winged Wheeler WordPress blog when it comes to hockey. Follow me on Twitter at Greg Eno. Follow the Knee Jerks on Twitter at the Knee Jerks, and of course our Facebook page is facebook.com/the Knee Jerks. I want to thank my lovely wife Sharon for putting up with this nonsense, and you, Big Al, for making Sunday night so gosh darn fun.
And it was obvious Bean was enjoying the show as well, as we could heard him. So thank you, Bean, for being a cheerleader. As always, I want to give a shout out to my girlfriend Linda, who is busy saving lives in the ER tonight, and Taylor, God help her, or I should say God have mercy on her soul. But other than that, if you want to listen to the show, as always, you can go to Stitcher Radio, obviously Stitcher.com in your computer browser. You can get the Stitcher app on iOS in the Apple Apple iOS store, the App Store, and you can also get it on Google Play. Essentially, if you want to listen to the podcast on Stitcher, you can pretty much listen to anything you want when it comes to a computer browser on Android or iOS. We're also available on iTunes as every other podcast. Just search on both of these. Just search the Knee Jerks, Eno and Big Al on iTunes or Stitcher. Be able to listen to our bleedings every other week. And, of course, we are on YouTube. YouTube, we will obviously, again, search Eno and Big Al, the Knee Jerks. You can hit like, hit subscribe, and watch our mugs rant and rave for the hour and a half that we usually do. And, of course, you can go to the mothership. You can go to our podcast page where you can download this podcast directly. Use the kneejerks.net. That'll take you to our host page where you can directly download. And, of course, we have the kneejerks.us, which is the blog. And, of course, you can also go to the Facebook fan page, the Knee Jerks on Facebook. I think that about covers it. Okay, I'm out of breath after all that. All right, so we should have lots to talk about in the next podcast. The Tigers' regular season will have started. The Red Wings season will be probably, if not over, it'll be on the verge of being now over. The Pistons we should know where the Pistons are when it comes to the playoffs in 2 weeks' time. And we'll probably have some draft talk as well with the Lions. And, of course, what's going on in the NCAA Tournament, because this looks like Michigan State could have long runs. All right, with that, let's get the hell out of here, Greg. So until this time, 2 weeks from now, this is Al Beaton saying good evening, good luck, and aloha.
Ciao, everybody. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Good night.